Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tik-A Tee Method. My name is Ron Castonguay, longtime educator, composer, author, conductor, clinician, performer. So glad you're joining us again for this next installment for week 2 as we dive into eighth notes today. Very exciting. So I hope you'll stick around for the video. Let's go do this. All right, before we dive into week 2, it's really important that you go check out week 1. There were a lot of important concepts that you need to know about before you can move on to week 2, as well as information on how to best use my book, the table of contents, how to access the MP3s, what all the instructions and suggestions mean before the exercises, so forth and so on. We went over common time and 4/4 time signature. We went over whole notes, half notes, quarter notes. We went over whole rests, half rests, quarter rests, bar lines, best metronome settings, making sure that you're performing it and singing the exercises, all kinds of good stuff in that week. So I'll put a link to that video in the description below. If you already did check it out, thank you so much. That means you are ready to move on to week 2. So let's go tackle some eighth notes. Here we are, week 2, or chapter 2 from my book. We're talking all about paired eighth notes and how they divide a quarter note into 2 equal parts. So in 4/4, we have 4 beats in a measure, and the quarter note gets the beat. So I'm just going to snap my fingers to represent the quarter note and the tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, so forth and so on. Okay, and there's a bar line between each one of those measures. Now, if I was to take that snap and divide it into 2 equal parts, we now have paired eighth notes, and they would sound like this. T, 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 T. So T is what we use for a single eighth note. In this week, we're always going to have paired eighth notes, therefore we'll always be saying T, T. The way you pronounce T in the Tik-A Tee method is totally up to you, but there's 2 basic ways to do it. The more horizontal approach, T, 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 or the more choral vertical approach by using the German umlaut. I know that sounds really fancy, but it's super easy. It's E on the inside of your mouth and U on your lips. U. So it would sound like this. T, 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 T. I believe strongly that our rhythm exercises should be musical, and our instruments are merely extensions of our voices, especially if our voice is not our principal instrument. So by performing this with thinking about tone quality, it just helps us bring relevance and musicianship to our rhythms, knowing that one day the rhythms that we're working on in these exercises will definitely appear in our music. Let's quickly discuss the anatomy, or the names of the parts of the notes as they appear in the staff. Here we have our 2 eighth notes. They're paired together, they're grouped together as we just talked about. This circle, whether it's empty or filled in this case, this represents the pitch class that a note is to be performed on, be it a line note, a space note, with a ledger line, without a ledger line, a high note, a low note, so forth and so on. The correct name of this circle is called a note head. The line that extends from our note head, either up or down, is always called a stem. And the line that connects our 2 notes, in this case creating our paired or grouped eighth note, is called a beam. So this line right here is called a beam. Those are the basic names of the notes, or the anatomy of the notes as they appear in the musical staff. And I think it's important as we go through the book that we're all talking the same language. Let's dive a little bit more deeply now into our paired eighth notes by looking at the simple diagram at the bottom of the page. It's showing us that 2 beamed eighth notes are equal to a single quarter note, or equal to a single quarter rest. We know in 4/4 time that there are 4 beats in the measure, and the quarter note gets the beat. Ta, 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 bar line, so forth and so on. If we were to divide each of those quarter notes into 2 equal parts, we would have our paired eighth notes. T, 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 bar line, so forth and so on. Let's put this in diagram form. Let's draw 4 quarter notes, represented in 4/4 time. Now, 4/4 time can also be a symbol, the letter C, which means common time. So you can see this as the time signature, or this, they mean the same exact thing. Okay, moving on. So let's divide each of these quarter notes into 2 equal eighth notes. We have our note heads, our stems, and our beam. And we go through all 4 beats, creating paired groupings of eighth notes. So how many eighth notes before we hit a bar line can we have in a single 4/4 measure? The answer is 8. T, 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 T. Then we would be in a new measure. Ta, 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 ta. Then we would be in a new measure after that. The exercises that follow, as mentioned previously, will all have paired eighth notes in the exercises. So the most that there'll be in any given measure is 8 eighth notes. And speaking of exercises, now's the time we can move on and do a couple of exercises together. Let's go. We're going to start with exercise 2A. In week 1's video, I went through the instructions and suggestions that precede all of the exercises for every week or every chapter in my book. I went over them in some pretty good detail if you want to go back and check that out. Otherwise, you can pause the video now and just read through these instructions and suggestions before proceeding. The important points to know are that you should be using a metronome at a tempo that is comfortable for you and the level that you're at. And number 2, you should be singing the verbiage of the Tik-A Tee method as you perform these exercises so they are as musical as possible. When you look at exercise 2A, you probably notice right away that there's some numbers and plus symbols above the first line, above the first 4 measures. And as you probably guessed, those are the beats in the measures. So this is where the metronome will be clicking. And this is to help you better compartmentalize or subdivide the measures and see where the clicking's happening versus where the notes or the rests are occurring. The plus symbol, or the and symbol, refers to the second eighth note in the paired eighth note grouping. And this is an important point that I'd like to make. So this is in reference to the numerical system for counting rhythms. And I want to say this up front. The Tik-A Tee method is an option for you. If you have a rhythmic sight reading method that works for you, fantastic. Stick with it. Don't change it. If it's working, great. My method is an offering to those of you looking for something that works across all ensembles, works across all grade levels, works at all tempos and in all time signatures, and is easy to learn right away. That's where I developed this one. Derived. Actually, the word that I prefer now is arrived. After decades of teaching all those different ensembles, I arrived at this method. And I have tried the numerical system, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I've tried the Takadimi method, the Gordon method, the solfege method, and I've taken bits and pieces of those over the years. But after a while, after decades of doing it, I realized that I needed a method that worked in the choral world, the instrumental world, the jazz world, the orchestral world, the music theory, AP music theory, IB music world, that worked across all those different classes and ensembles, as well as elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and beyond. Some of these methods work great at certain ages, some of them don't. Some of them work great in certain ensembles, but not in another ensemble. I needed a universal method that worked for me as a music educator, but more importantly, that worked for my students. And this system, the Tik-A Tee method, seems to be a system that has worked, and my students have found success. So again, the Tik-A Tee method is just an option for you. The takeaway here is how important it is that musicians are able to read rhythms, understand time signatures, comprehensively begin to read music notation and understand it like we would read a language. How do the rhythms that we're reading in this book, for example, related to the music that's on my music stand right now? And if you're an educator, what works best for you? What works best, more importantly, for your students? Maybe it's a combination of a bunch of different methods. Again, the Tik-A Tee method is just another option for you, and I hope that you'll consider it. Okay, let's get back to exercise 2A. Notice a couple more things, and then we'll perform the exercise together. One thing that I notice in this 8-measure exercise is that there are only 2 rests in here. In the second measure, we've got a half rest. That gets 2 beats of silence. In the 5th measure, we've got a quarter rest. That gets 1 beat of silence. So there's not a whole lot of silence in this exercise. There's going to be a lot of quarter notes, eighth notes, half notes, whole notes. So breathing could become an issue. But like I said in my video for week 1, breathe wherever you need to when you sing these exercises. Just stay with the metronome and maintain the integrity of the rhythms. That's the most important part. And the last couple things I want to say about this exercise is that I noticed in measure 6, we have a full measure of eighth notes. And as we talked about before, you can have up to 8 eighth notes in a single measure in 4/4 time. T, 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 T. And that measure is followed by a whole note, which is the note in 4/4 that lasts the entire measure. Ta. So, very interesting to notice there. Another thing that you can do, if you have the book in front of you, is you can write the numbers of the beats, just like I did in the top line. You can do that on your own if you wanted to. Let me just find a pen here that works, and I'll do that down at the bottom. So, if I wanted to write the beats in, 1, 2, 3, 4, making sure that they all align properly. This one gets full 4 beats, ta, ta, and beats 3 and 4 will be that half note. You can certainly do that in your book, and it definitely helps. So these are the types of things you should be doing, looking for, and practicing when you look at the exercise for 20 to 30 seconds before you actually perform it. And without further ado, let's perform this one together right now. You will notice that I changed up the metronome from the Boss DB90 to Tonal Energy. I know I was talking this one up a lot last video. I'm not sponsored by them. I don't work for them, but it is a great app. So I have my phone hooked up here so that we can demonstrate this metronome in today's video. So I'll get that metronome clicking. We do have an accent on the downbeat of every measure, which is very helpful. I'll give my pitch, which I do a G3. You're welcome to do G2, G4, or harmony if you want to, but I hope that you will join me. So here we go. Let's get the metronome clicking. There it is. Here's the pitch. La, la, la. And we're going to go off to the races, okay? So we're going to count it off, and then we're going to start. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta, ti, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta. Ti, 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 ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, ta. Ta, ti, 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 ta. Ta, ta, ta. And there you have it. And of course, you've all concluded, I am definitely not a professional singer. But again, it doesn't matter. The idea is that we're making music, that we're bringing relevance to our rhythms and we're performing them musically. So I hope that you joined me. The next step, of course, is to go to the MP3s, check it, do it again, see if we did it right. And then, of course, that next really important step, especially if you're not a vocalist, is to perform these rhythms on your instrument. That is a crucial step in all of this. All right, so as I said, the next step is to go and listen to the MP3s. You should sing along or perform along on your instrument. So on your screen, you should have exercise 2A up there on the right-hand side. The lower left is my computer screen. I have the MP3s pulled up. And just to review, if you need to get to the MP3s, roncastonguay.com, click on the author clinician link, and then just scroll down. All the MP3s are right there for you. So we're looking at week 2, exercise A. It's right here in the second box because we're in week 2. All I have to do is click on this play button because it's already queued up. So if you need to get ready with your instrument, hit pause on the video now. If you're ready to go, I'm going to click play, and I hope that you'll join along either by singing or playing your instrument. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta, ti, ti, ta, ti, ti, ta. Ti, 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 ta. Ta, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta. Ta, ti, 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 ta. Ta, ta, ta. Okay, so if you sang along and you got it right, fantastic. The next step for you now is to play it on your instrument if your instrument isn't the voice. Again, a really important step for you before you move on to the next exercise is to be able to play the current exercise on your instrument. we are ready to move on to exercise 2B. Now, that is assuming that you performed exercise 2A not only accurately, but on your instrument. Very important. Maybe you tried a faster tempo, maybe you performed it a couple of times with the MP3. Either way, you grasp the concepts, you performed it correctly, you're ready to move on. That being said, these videos are only intended to be supplemental resources to my actual book. So I do hope you will consider going out and getting the book so you have access to over 346 of these practice exercises, from beginning to advanced. Simple time signatures, compound, complex. There's diagrams, there's information in the book that will not be in these videos. So I do hope you'll consider going out and checking it out. So let's look at exercise 2B. Now, here's the time where you have 10, 20, 30 seconds to look at an exercise and study it a little bit before you actually have to perform it. You can even pause the video right now if you want to. Some of the things that I'm going to look for in this particular exercise, I want to know where the rests are. I want to know where the silence is going to be happening. And I notice in measure 2, I've got a half rest that's going to take up 2 beats of silence. And measure 4, I've got another half rest. And I've got this great reminder here to remind me to look ahead during that rest, especially when I'm changing lines. So don't be staring at a rest when it's happening. Look ahead and see what's coming up next. And what's coming up next, in measure 5, we've got a couple more rests, quarter rests on beat 2 and 4. So we'll have silence on beats 2 and 4. And then guess what? In the very next measure, beats 2 and 4 again have quarter rests. So we're going to have silence in 2 measures in a row on beats 2 and 4. These are the types of things that I may look at an exercise of this level. You may be looking at something completely different, other challenges depending on where you are in this journey of reading music notation and rhythms. So without further ado, let's perform this one together. So I'm going to start our metronome with all 4 beats with that extra little click on beat 1. I'm going to give us our pitch, and then we're going to perform exercise 2B together. There's our metronome. There's our pitch. I'm going to count us off, and here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tee tee ta, tee tee ta. Ta ta, tee 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 ta ta. Ta. Tee tee, tee tee, ta, ta, tee 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 ta, tee tee ta. And notice how I held that note full value at the end. I held all of the longer notes, even quarter notes, full value. Very important when you do these exercises. So we all know what the next step is. Let's go check out the MP3 and see if we did it right. So here we are with the MP3s open. We've got exercise 2B up on the screen. We've got the web page down at the bottom with the exercises. I'm going to hit the fast forward button over here to get myself to exercise 2B. Then I'm going to click this play button, and you guys are going to perform it along again with the MP3. You can sing it, or now would be the time to pause the video, get your instrument ready, then play along with the MP3. So here we go, exercise 2B, here's the MP3. One, 2, 3, 4. Tee tee ta, tee tee ta. Ta ta. Tee 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 ta ta. Ta. Tee 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 ta. Ta. Tee 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 ta. Tee tee ta. And there it is, my friends. There is exercise 2B, the MP3. So we all know what to do next. We either do it a couple of more times on our instrument, maybe we do it with a metronome at a little bit faster tempo. Either way, once we perform it accurately, once we really grasp the concepts in this exercise, we're ready to move on to the next exercise. So again, if you have the book, that's exactly what you should do. One, two, three, and All right, that does it for video week 2. Thank you so much for joining me, and I do hope you joined me as you sang along with those 2 rhythm exercises that we did today. I hope you had some fun along the way, maybe learned a little bit about paired eighth notes. Please do check out my book, Rhythmic Sight-Reading, the Tik-A Tee Method. It is available at my website, roncastonguay.com. It is also available on Amazon and at jwpepper.com. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and that notification bell so you get the latest video. Leave a comment below if you've got one. I will try to reply to all comments. And thank you again for joining me. I will see you next week.